In Salmon Run, you can get an additional 4th wave at the end of a shift in which you have to face one or multiple King Salmonids. During these waves, you'll encounter Cohozuna, Horrorboros, Megalodontia, or Triumvirate. These kings are all very powerful and each have their own mechanics and attacks, making them tough enemies even for more experienced salmon runners. So in today's video, I'll share some tips to help you clear extra waves. I'll explain how each of these King Salmonids work, along with the best ways to defeat all of them. Let's go in the order in which the King Salmonids got released, starting with Cohozuna. Cohozuna was the first King Salmonid added to Splatoon 3. He's this massive Cohawk that has 2 attacks, consisting of a charge and a big jump that he only does a few times during the wave. Despite being pretty basic design-wise, Cohozuna is actually not that easy to beat because he has a lot of health with no weak spots. The best way to damage him is by using golden eggs. Eggs can consistently do a lot of damage in a way that a majority of main weapons can't. So most of the wave is usually spent killing boss salmonids to use their eggs to attack Cohozuna. But keep in mind that you can still use certain main weapons on him. These are high damage weapons such as Hydra Splatling, Splooshomatic, or Dapple Doolies. These weapons are incredibly strong in Salmon Run in general, and they're just as good against Cohozuna. It's also worth noting that he follows and attacks the player closest to him, so try to lure him near any eggs, because it becomes impossible to beat him if he's on the other side of the map with no eggs at all. When it comes to specials, it's important to time them correctly if you're going to use them on him, because with his jump attacks, it's so easy to mistime a special and completely waste it. I mean, at this point, I've lost count of how many times I ended up wasting my one special just because I used it right before he jumped. Overall, Cohozuna is pretty simple to understand, but he can still be a challenge because he has a lot of health and no big weakness. For this King Salmonid, it's better to focus on killing bosses and using their eggs to attack it, but you can also use main weapons if they have good enough damage. Next up, we have a King Salmonid from Fresh Season 2023, Horrorboros, which I'll be referring to as Boris. Boris is the only King Salmonid that's never grounded. His attack is a big booyah bomb that he charges up and launches onto the map, but that bomb also happens to be his weak spot. With this king, it's pretty straightforward. You need to focus on that bomb. Not only is it pretty easy to hit it, but Boris takes a ton of damage once you destroy it. Here you have much more freedom than you do with Cohozuna when it comes to your different options. Eggs are, of course, still very important, but you have a larger pool of main weapons that can be used. You can use basically any weapon as long as you have enough range to hit its bomb or high ground like the tower on Sakai Station. That freedom makes it easier to beat him, but it can also make you fall into tunnel vision. Because yes, you should focus on the bomb, but that requires you to look up and lose sight of your surroundings. So remember to still keep track of what's going on so you don't get surprised by a horde of lessers or some other attack you didn't see coming. Him being in the sky is still a really good thing though. It gives you much more space to work with, so if you stay aware, it'll be easier to handle the other salmonids that are spawning on the map because you won't have this massive fish in the way. Horrorboros is probably the easiest King Salmonid if you keep track of your surroundings and don't get caught up in its attack. You'll easily be able to defeat it as long as you make sure to focus your efforts on destroying its bomb with eggs, specials, and even main weapons. Moving on, we have the last standalone King Salmonid, Megalodontia, which I'll be referring to as Joe. Listen, I can already barely pronounce normal words. It's their fault for having complicated names. Joe is this humongous King Salmonid that works similarly to Moss. He goes underground to target a player, then surges up to bite them. And while he's out of the ground, he exposes his weak spot, which is his back. He has this massive button on his back, and that's what you should try to aim for. And I say try because this thing is so big you have to completely reposition if its weak spot isn't right in front of you. This King Salmonid has the most health out of all of them, so like Cohozuna, your time is better spent getting eggs to attack it. This may seem really hard, but you can actually use Joe's attack to your advantage. His bite doesn't just kill players if he catches them, he can also kill other salmonids. And knowing this is crucial to defeating Joe because you will need a lot of eggs. Now it can be tough to control his attack because you don't have much time to think, especially when the map is that chaotic, but it's still important to lure him to other bosses to have a better chance at beating him. Also, remember that his back faces wherever he was last. So if he attacks in the middle of the map, his back will be facing that exact spot the next time he surges up. This is very hard to control with everything else going on, but it's good to know so you have the time to get in a good position before he's vulnerable again. Megalodontia is a hard king salmonid to defeat. It has a lot of HP and takes up a ton of space, which makes some maps near unplayable. But the best way to beat him is to use his attack against other salmonids and get in positions where you can attack his weak point with eggs. And finally, we have the hardest kind of extra wave and my personal favorite, Triumvirate. Triumvirate only appears during special rotations like big runs or random rotations. It makes you face all 3 king salmonids at once. But don't worry, your team is distributed all Grisco weapons and you have 2 specials instead of 1 to help you during the wave. Now clearly, it's impossible to defeat them one by one in 100 seconds. I mean, there's barely enough time to do it when it's just one of them, so you need to see them as a trio instead of separate entities. These kings can actually interact with each other, so the way to defeat Triumvirate is to use their attacks. Cohozuna is a bit useless for this, but Horrorboros and Megalodontia are very important here. As I mentioned earlier, Joe's bite doesn't just kill players but also salmonids, meaning that it can be used against other kings as well. And when Boris's bomb gets destroyed, it doesn't just damage him but also the king salmonids around him. So with Triumvirate, whoever is targeted by Joe needs to lure him right underneath Boris to one-shot the bomb with his bite. Ideally, this does quite a bit of damage to Boris, Joe, and Cohozuna if it's close enough, but if Boris dies or you can't get under the bomb in time, remember that you can use Joe against Cohozuna too. Boris is still pretty easy to take care of here, but of course you have 2 other big fish to beat. And how easy this is will depend a lot on the randomized Grisco weapons you got. If you have a high damage or fast weapon like the Grisco Dualies or Stringer, you'll want to directly attack the remaining king salmonids. These weapons are insanely strong against them, and one fully charged shot from the Stringer is over 1000 damage. And if you have a weaker or slower weapon like the Slosher, it's better to focus on killing bosses and using their eggs to help out. But in general, you will have a much easier time against Triumvirate if you know the weapon you were loaned, because Grisco weapons are all very powerful but also quite hard to use, so knowing the basics can be really helpful. Frankly, Triumvirate is extremely complicated even for the most skilled of salmon runners. They take up so much space that it's hard to move around or do anything really, and the whole time you're surrounded by other salmonids as well. But you'll have a better chance at defeating Triumvirate if you remember to use the kings against each other and know how to use the Grisco weapons. Also, it's easy to forget, but make sure to use both your specials. That damage will go a long way. And that concludes this guide on how to defeat the king salmonids. I didn't mention it, but it's worth noting that the rotation you're playing can affect how well you do in extra waves. Your knowledge and fundamentals are still super important, but some rotations are just ass and will be an uphill battle even for the easiest of waves. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments how many king salmonids you've defeated. Don't forget to like and subscribe on your way out, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye!